Hello and welcome. My name is Mnonkwa. This is my attempt at coming back to YouTube. Let's see how this goes. Some of you may already know me. Some of you probably don't, and that's alright. Hello and welcome. The short story is I was trying to find a way to come back to YouTube in a way that's fine by my standards, I guess. If you know me from my previous content, it was mostly focused around tarot, some witchery as well, but that was mostly kept private out of YouTube. This time around I would like to focus on the latter, on witchcraft primarily. So I tried to find a tag to participate in that would be fun for me. However, I did not manage to find something suitable for my needs, so I decided to create my own tag centered around the practice of witchcraft. In this tag, you have 10 questions to answer, and these are questions that, in my view, are not fillers that are meant to talk about irrelevant aspects of the craft, but rather these are questions that I would genuinely want to ask you if I would want to get to know you better as a practitioner of witchcraft. If you're watching this video, if you like these questions, feel free to participate, no matter what your practice looks like. I'm sure many practitioners will find that these questions are perhaps something that's worth asking yourself on your path every now and then in order to verify where you're at as a practitioner, be it a practitioner of witchcraft, of the occult, or spirituality broadly. The hashtag for this is TradWitchTag, which of course kind of relates to traditional witchcraft, which is one of my main focuses. But the name of the tag, if you don't see yourself as a traditional witch, that doesn't mean you can't participate. So the first question is, what kind of craft do you practice? And there's some examples for you if you are not sure about the focus of the question. So the kind of craft that I personally practice is mostly folk witchcraft and traditional witchcraft. And my focus is mainly on the Slavic traditional folk practices when it comes to folk witchcraft, and when it comes to traditional witchcraft, I mainly base my practice on historical accounts from the witch trials, for example, or other historical accounts that are broadly European from that time period. So this may also include some grimoire work, or at least grimoire inspiration in my craft. The second question is, what paradigm, faith, or philosophy informs your craft? And here again you will find some examples in case you are not sure how to answer this question for yourself. So the paradigm, faith, or philosophy that informs your craft, I feel like this is a really important question to ask yourself, as in my personal experience, this is something that will also change over the years as you grow as a practitioner. When I first started, but I will also talk about that later on in one of those questions, my craft did not look the way it looks now. For sure, it changed quite a lot. So if I had to answer which paradigm or philosophy informs my craft the most these days, it's definitely animism, which in my opinion is kind of a synthesis of quite a few approaches. When it comes to the kind of classical paradigms of magic and witchcraft that we recognize in the modern days, this would definitely be the spirit paradigm, the energy paradigm, and perhaps some aspects of pantheism within it. But Animism feels like a condensed form of all of those in a way that comes from the most primal, most ancient practices of the humankind. That's why I like to identify as an animist witch. The third question is, what culture is your practice rooted in? And I feel that this is an important question to ask yourself as well, especially if you practice folk witchcraft or traditional witchcraft or any other land-based paths of magic. So for me, this is mainly the Slavic culture. This is the culture I was born in, I grew up in, and I still live in this culture to this day. So when it comes to the Slavic culture, it also is not just so simple, right? As with most cultures in the world, when it comes to the Slavs, you have groups of Slavs and their folk practices and their traditional witchcraft will look different depending on where they are from. The broad division would be the Eastern Slavs, the Western Slavs, and the Southern Slavs. Personally, I come from a region that would be considered Western Slavic. Therefore, my craft is mostly informed by Western Slavic traditions. I feel like it's also important to mention here that many people have mixed ancestry, where your ancestors come from various places around the world, and it's of course alright to try and find your own mixture of said cultures in your personal practice. That said, I would be very wary of mixing in aspects of cultures that feel completely foreign to you. This is not necessarily about blood and about DNA, ancestry, that kind of a thing, because that can be problematic in and of itself. But if you don't have the right sources, you can't really access the right sources due to a language barrier, due to the fact that you live far away from the culture that you're interested in, perhaps it's important to rethink how you can engage in that culture. And my suggestion here would be to find a practitioner who has access to the language, has access to the culture, and can give you the knowledge firsthand. That way you know that what you engage in is not someone else's crooked version of that culture based on pop culture examples of it, rather than an authentic representation of it. The next question is, how long have you been practicing and how did it all start? This is a cool question. I first started practicing when I was 16. That was back in 2006. I'm 32 now, so it's been a while. How did it all start? That really, in my case, which of course each case would be unique in this regard, should be a separate question, because for me the things that caused me to be a practitioner started much earlier on in my childhood. The first memories that I have of experiences that could be seen as initiatory start at me being 3 years old. So pretty much from the very beginning. Although when I first consciously started engaging in the practices of the occult, that was because I wanted to actively find ways to protect myself and to deal with some of the spiritual experiences that I had in my life, and many of which were really scary and terrifying. It wasn't something that I could just ignore in my life. Therefore, finding my practice was a turning point in my personal life, where I finally was empowered to do something about the experiences that I was given. The fifth question is, what books or resources have you first started with? Would you recommend them to others today? This, I feel like, is a really important question, because I often see people recommending the same books over and over, no matter how much we've grown on our path. And so I feel like it's important to verify the sources that we would recommend to others every now and then, even though some sources have influenced us personally and helped us on our path. That doesn't mean that we would still choose them again today, considering that there's so many other sources available. So the short answer for me would be the sources I started with were mostly ceremonial magic, namely Crowley, so Thelema, and the Golden Dawn kind of influences, as well as chaos magic resources like Phil Hine or Peter Carroll, Alejandro Jodorowsky, and Robert Anton Wilson, as well as Austin Osman Spare. So would I recommend those sources today for somebody who would want to practice something similar to myself? Probably not as learning resources, probably not as resources that you can actually read in order to incorporate something into your practice. But that said, I am a big book nerd, and I will always encourage people to read everything and anything you can get your hands on in order to develop your own sense of critical thinking, so that you can think for yourself and be able to distinguish which sources are worth being worked with versus which sources can be a scam before you test them in practice. Because testing something in practice and finding many months later that it doesn't work the way it's supposed to work is a huge waste of time that some of us can't really afford nowadays. So I feel like it's important to be able to read and distinguish what's worth reading and what's not worth reading or trying in practice. The sixth question is, how has your practice and or paradigm changed over the years, if at all? This is also, to me, an important question, as most of those on this list. Both my approach to witchcraft and the paradigm I operate within have changed quite a lot since I first began this work. So my initial approach to witchcraft and to magic was very much rooted in the psychological paradigm. This is something that's also connected to my chosen career path in life. Therefore, it came to me naturally, as I was just naturally inclined to perceive the world through this lens. However, and that also included the kind of chaos magic approach, because it incorporates the experimental method of working magic. So very much rooted in how you would do experiments in the field of psychology as well, which again was known to me firsthand from my chosen career path. However, over the years, as I was practicing more, and especially as I was experiencing more and more spirit contact, but not in a way where this is some kind of, written contract where you are supposed to gain some kind of self-help tools for the development of your psyche. No, rather in ways that are more tangible and sorcerous even, and ecological in a lot of ways. That began the process of my shifting of how I perceive the world, and I arrived from the psychological paradigm, which is very much rooted in your own psyche, to something completely opposite, which is animism, where you acknowledge that the world is alive and that the world and the beings that dwell within it possess personhood. So it was a big deal for me, this change. It was very, very, very transformational. It really changed my life, I have to admit that. And this is what truly brought my witchcraft to the next level. I am not saying that this is a path for everybody and that everyone would experience it similarly to myself. I am just saying how this experience was felt for me and how transformational it was. So yes, in this regard, from the beginning to where I am now, there's been a lot of big changes in the paradigm, in the perception of the world, and therefore, as a result, in how I engage and work my magic and my witchcraft. Question number 7. What does your daily/regular practice look like? What do you do on a regular basis? This is another question that I'm always very curious to learn about when it comes to other practitioners. This is how I feel like you can distinguish those who truly practice from those who are, as we say, armchair occultists, who devour books but never really put any of it into practice. So when it comes to my regular practice, it's twofold. Part of it, half of it really, is the work that I do within my coven. My coven is local to where I live, and we do celebrate the 8 Sabbats around the wheel of the year. However, these are not your typical neo-pagan Sabbats. These are very much rooted in the tradition that we work within, that was established based on our group gnosis with the spirits that we work with and within the tradition that we are true to. So that is half of my craft, that is the group work. And the second half of the work is solitary. This is something I practice alone, either within my home or outside in the nearby nature, in the forest usually. And this includes practices that mostly have to do with trance work. So entering altered states of consciousness, namely trance, in order to journey to the underworld usually, but also to other worlds in order to communicate with spirits, sometimes to do some work with them. Sometimes that also includes working with the dead, be it my direct ancestors or other dead that I work with. So working with the local spirits of the land through trance work and working with the dead are my 2 main pillars of my personal witchcraft. Question number 8 asks, are there aspects of your craft that you need to keep secret? In your opinion, is secrecy important in witchcraft? The short answer is yes. There are some aspects of my craft that I need to keep secret. Some of it has to do with the coven work. There are aspects of our craft that cannot be revealed to outsiders, and this is for safety reasons as well as in order to protect our traditions from the uninitiated. And then when it comes to my personal practice, of course, secrecy also applies, and it mostly has to do with not revealing, for example, the names of the spirits that I work with. I may reveal the kind of spirit I am working with, however, the exact name and their identity is something that I will keep secret in order to protect both myself and the spirit and the relationship that we have when working with each other. That's one of the aspects that's for me the most important to keep secret, because that is something that can go wrong the most. But also when it comes to secrecy in my personal practice, that would have to do with some workings that I am doing. I am definitely not somebody who would be sharing or posting online about the spells I do, about the protection magic that I do, about the gnosis that I experienced when being in a trance state. These are some of the experiences that I reserve only for either myself or discussing with my coven mates or really close friends. But some of it is so private that only I and the spirits know about it. And do I think secrecy is important? I would say, of course, everybody has free will, everybody can decide for themselves based on their experiences. Personally, I think, yes, it's important and it's a game changer. When you reveal too much, I feel like what you do loses power on quite a few fronts. So if you are perhaps somebody who's sharing a lot of your craft, see if not doing that for a month or longer changes anything or not. That's the only way that you will know the difference. The next question number 9, is what are some of your favorite tools that you use regularly? For me, this would be quite a few tools actually. I will just mention some of them. What I use on a regular basis is my drums, which I use to enter trance, as well as other kind of primitive instruments that are traditionally used for this purpose, such as various kinds of rattles or bells usually. So drums and other instruments, that's one. Another that's really important for me is my stang, which is a kind of staff that's used in traditional witchcraft. Another would be my prayer beads, which I have various kinds of prayer beads that I use for different purposes, and I often create my own for very specific purposes. So prayer beads also serve this purpose of entering trance states or altered states of consciousness, or they are also very handy in breathwork practices. And another, and maybe a no-brainer for many, would be divination tools. Divination is also a big part of my practice. This is how I often communicate with the spirits I work with or the ancestors I work with outside of a deep trance state. So I have quite a lot of tarot cards. I also use the runes, the pendulum. I love using scrying mirror. I like especially the black obsidian mirror I have. I've also been experimenting with some other, sometimes primitive ways of scrying or divination. I really love my divination tools. Question number 10 is what books or resources would you recommend to newbie witches interested in your kind of craft? And I feel like this is a very important question and also very important answer, right? Because I feel like those of us who have been practicing for a while and consider ourselves to be advanced in what we do, it also is a responsibility to the community of witches to make sure that what we offer, what we suggest, and the resources that we recommend to others are recommended in a spirit of right relations, where you really don't want other people to waste their time. You don't want them to work in circles, in paradigms that you know deep down don't work. And of course, I'm not saying that anybody is obliged in any way or responsible in any way to be a teacher to other witches. This is something that I myself am really not willing to be, especially not on the internet, not in this capacity. But I'm saying that whatever you recommend really is a responsibility to others. So I am mentioning this mostly because, again, I said earlier, I am a huge book nerd. I read a lot of books all the fucking time. And I've read so many bad, really bad witchcraft books, modern books, that are just dished out one after another, and they are just copy-paste of each other almost, presenting nothing fresh and presenting nothing that can really be applied in practice. It's mostly just books that are meant to make readers feel good about identifying as witches. And I'm really not a fan of this trend, and I feel like it's wasting trees and wasting people's money, especially nowadays where books are very expensive. At least for somebody who lives where I live, they are not cheap. So I think it's important to recommend sources that you can really stand by, you know what I mean? That you can really vouch for in that regard. So if somebody was a total newbie and wanted to begin witchcraft in the kind of strand of it that I personally do, which would be traditional witchcraft and folk witchcraft, I would highly, highly, highly recommend reading just 2 authors, but read all of their books. First of all, Roger J. Horne, especially start with the book known as Folk Witchcraft. That's a great beginner's book that will really give you a good, thorough understanding if you apply it in practice. This is not something that you're just supposed to read and suddenly you will become advanced. And no, that's not the case with any witchcraft books. That's just not how witchcraft works, really. So if you read it and then apply it in practice, I assure you, you will have a solid base to go off of in your craft. Then when you're done with Folk Witchcraft by Roger J. Horne, I would suggest reading another one of his books, A Broom at Midnight, which is a book where he shares with you 13 methods of spirit flight. That includes 13 methods of journeying to the other worlds. It's very handy if you want to practice traditional witchcraft and folk witchcraft. But it's advanced compared to folk witchcraft, which is why I suggest starting with that one. And also another author I would like to recommend for total newbies would be Lee Morgan and his 2 books. First of all, Standing and Not Falling, which is a really cool workbook that you can work with over the course of 13 moon cycles, so over a year. And on top of that, reading simultaneously, really, because that will help expand some of the ideas in the first book, would be A Deed Without a Name by the same author, which is more of a theoretical background to the first book I mentioned. And I guarantee you that the 4 books I mentioned, if you're interested in the kind of craft that I practice, these are solid foundations, and you don't need to buy any other books until you are done with those 4. You will save yourself a fuckload of money and time reading something that's really not needed. And once you are done with those 4, in my opinion, then you can kind of expand and read more and kind of find or discover your own flavor of witchcraft, especially traditional witchcraft and folk magic based on those 4 books. And naturally, I am not mentioning any resources that are culture-based here. Those 4 I mentioned are very neutral in that regard. So of course, if you come from a specific culture or are interested in specific cultures' witchcraft practices, then on top of that, I would recommend just reading books that are written by researchers who are folklorists or ethnographers or archaeologists, people who have been studying those cultures and recording some of the folk practices, because the way they do it is thorough and it's not tainted by somebody's personal notice or somebody's opinion or somebody trying to over-exaggerate how things truly work in some cultures, okay, which is really common sadly in books by neo-pagans / witches. So when it comes to studying the culture you're interested in, books that were written by researchers win every single time. And of course, I will also recommend supporting creators who come from the cultures you are interested in and can give you this kind of knowledge firsthand if you don't have access to language. One example would be myself. I offer those kinds of resources for people who are interested in Slavic traditional witchcraft, folk magic, folklore, mythology, pagan practices. So because I have access to the language firsthand, I offer a lot of really thoroughly researched videos and articles that will help you introduce yourself into this topic and include it into your own practice that you already have. Anyway, this was really quite a bit of fun. I hope it wasn't boring for you. If you would like to participate in the tag, I would love it. So please just go for it in whatever way, shape or form you're into. So I am hidden behind a mask because I need to protect my identity for specific reasons that I'm not going to go into right now. And I thought that instead of doing a video where you can just see my hands and me showing you items that you can potentially waste your money on, I would just mask myself and make this video a little bit mysterious, I suppose. So hope you enjoyed this, and maybe see you soon.